She hides in an abandoned cabin to avoid her ex until the Mafia boss knocks on her door. The gravel road was less a road than a memory. Two muddy ruts choked by weeds that clawed at the undercarriage of her 1998 sedan. Alina Moore gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, her body vibrating with the car's agonizing rattle and the thrum of pure, undiluted fear. She'd been driving for 3 days, living on stale crackers and lukewarm bottled water, pushing deeper into the Appalachian wilderness until the cell signal had vanished 2 hours ago, and the last gas station attendant had given her a look that was half pity, half suspicion. She finally saw it. The cabin. It was more a shack, really a dark shape sagging against the deep green of the pines. It was slumped, broken, and utterly alone. It was perfect. She killed the engine. The resulting silence was so absolute it roared in her ears, a deafening vacuum where the noise of Charleston, the traffic, the music, the shouting, used to be. She was alone. She'd cut off every contact, deleted every social media profile, smashed her phone, and left it in a dumpster outside Charlotte. She had taken only one bag and the $400 in cash she had managed to siphon from their joint account over 6 months. Everything else was gone, left behind. Alina sat for a full 10 minutes, her breath fogging the windshield in the cool October air. Only when her bladder screamed did she finally move, her limbs stiff and aching. The cabin door wasn't locked. It scraped open on a swollen jamb, complaining loudly. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, damp plaster and the sharp, sour scent of mice. A thick coat of gray dust covered everything, the single rusted cot, the rough-hewn table, the small, pot-bellied stove in the corner. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like funeral shrouds. This was her sanctuary. This was her freedom. It looked, she thought with a bitter twist in her gut, exactly like despair. She dropped her bag by the door and immediately started to work. It was the only way to keep the memories at bay, the only way to fight the paralysis. She found a tattered broom and attacked the dust, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape against the floorboards a counterpoint to the voice in her head, Jared's voice. "You really think you can go anywhere I can't find you, baby? You really think you're that smart?" The memory hit her so hard she stumbled, leaning against the damp wall, her breath coming in shallow pants. It wasn't just the violence. The bruises healed. It was the control, the slow, systematic dismantling of her life until the only thing left was him, Jared Blake, with his easy smile for the Charleston elite and his dead eyes for her. He wasn't just a thug. He was becoming a figure. His influence in the local crime ring was growing. His name whispered with a new kind of fear. Cops who used to pull him over were suddenly shaking his hand. He was a spider, and Charleston was his web. She remembered the last night, the way he'd held her jaw, his thumb pressing into the soft skin beneath her ear, his voice a perfectly calm, perfectly terrifying whisper. "You belong to me. Alina, you're just a thing, my thing, and I don't let my things go." That night, she had finally found the strength. While he slept, drunk on whiskey and his own power, she'd slipped out. She hadn't just run. She had evaporated. Alina pushed the memory down, pressing her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. "No," she whispered to the empty, dusty room. "No more." She worked until her hands were raw. She swept. She scrubbed. She beat the filthy mattress until clouds of dust motes danced in the fading light. She found a stash of dry firewood in a collapsing lean-to out back and, after 20 minutes of frustration, managed to get a weak, smoky fire going in the stove. It wasn't livable, but she was living in it. As night fell, she ate a cold can of beans and barred the door with the only chair, her meager defenses set against the vast, dark wilderness. She was resilient, but she was also terrified. 2 weeks passed. The terror receded, replaced by a dull, constant anxiety and the ache of hard labor. The cabin slowly transformed. She had patched the leak in the roof with shingles she'd found in the shed. She'd scrubbed the floors clean, and the stove now burned hot and bright. She'd even found a small spring and hauled buckets of clear, ice-cold water. It was a hard, lonely existence, but it was hers. She was beginning to breathe again, to feel the shape of her own thoughts without Jared's shadow looming over them. Then the storm hit. It came on suddenly one night, a violent Appalachian squall that clawed at the mountains. Rain hammered the tin roof so loudly it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown against the metal. The wind shrieked through the pines, a high, mournful sound that vibrated in her bones. Alina sat huddled by the stove, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Watching the fire and trying to pretend the cabin walls weren't shaking, that's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, not the wind, not the rain, not a breaking branch, a heavy, wet thud against her door. Alina froze. Her heart stopped, then restarted with a painful kick against her ribs. It couldn't be. He couldn't have found her. Not here. Not this deep. She grabbed the fireplace poker, the iron heavy and cold in her slick palms. She crept toward the door, her stockinged feet silent on the wooden floor. Another sound, a groan, low and guttural. Then a knock. Not a knock. Really. A fist, banging once, twice, with a desperate, failing strength. "Go away," she whispered, her voice trembling, a wet sliding sound, as if someone had slumped against the wood. And then silence, broken only by the howl of the storm. She stood there for a full minute, her mind racing. It was a trap. Jared had sent someone. He was out there, watching, waiting for her to open the door. But the groan, it had sounded like pain, real pain, against every instinct for survival that had gotten her this far. Alina moved to the small, grimy window beside the door. She wiped a clear patch on the glass and peered out into the black. Driving rain. A shape. A man. He was collapsed on her doorstep, a dark mass of wet clothing. He wasn't moving. He wasn't Jared. This man was bigger, broader, even crumpled on the ground. Her decision was agonizing. Leaving him meant he would die, either from the exposure or from whatever had brought him here. Opening the door meant bringing the danger inside. She remembered the feeling of Jared's hand on her throat, and her hand tightened on the poker. But she also remembered the freezing, desperate loneliness of the last 2 weeks. "Damn it," she hissed. She unbarred the door. The wind ripped it from her hand, slamming it open against the wall. The man spilled partially inside, falling onto the entryway mat with a wet, heavy sound. He was huge, dressed in a dark, expensive-looking wool coat that was soaked through and plastered with mud and wet leaves. He was face down, and he wasn't moving. "Hey," she said, prodding his shoulder with the poker. "Hey, can you hear me?" He groaned, a deep rumble of agony. He tried to push himself up, bracing one hand on the floor. "Inside?" he muttered, his voice a raw rasp. "Get inside." Alina's terror was overcome by a strange, frantic adrenaline. She dropped the poker and grabbed him under the arms. He was incredibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and wet wool, but she managed to drag him, inch by painful inch, across the threshold and slam the door against the storm. He lay panting on her floor, the dim firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and black hair plastered to his forehead. He was devastatingly attractive, even half dead, and he was bleeding. "You're hurt," she said, stating the obvious. He turned his head, his eyes clenched shut. "No," he gritted out. "No hospital." The command was absolute, even from a man bleeding out on her floor. This was the moment she should have dragged him back outside. Instead, she knelt. "Where?" He didn't answer. He was fading. She saw the dark, spreading stain on his side, high on the ribs. Oh, God. She ripped his coat open. He was wearing a dark button-down shirt, and it was saturated. "You've been shot." His eyes flickered open. They were a startling, clear blue, and they were cold, even in his delirium. "No. Hospital," he repeated. Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Alina's hands were shaking so hard she could barely unbutton his shirt. She had to cut the fabric away with her kitchen knife. The wound was ugly, a dark, puckered hole just beneath his rib cage. It was bleeding sluggishly, but it was deep. She ran to her meager supplies. She had a first aid kit she'd bought at a pharmacy, but it was meant for blisters and scraped knees. It had gauze, antiseptic wipes, and a small roll of tape, and, from her grandmother's abandoned sewing kit, a needle and black thread. "You have got to be kidding me," she whispered to herself. She found the half-empty bottle of whiskey she'd been nursing for 2 weeks. She knelt beside him, took a long, burning swallow herself, and then poured the rest of it onto the wound. The man roared. He arched off the floor with a terrifying, inhuman sound, his hands grabbing for her. She scrambled back, but he collapsed again, unconscious. Her heart hammered. She forced herself to move. She cleaned the wound as best she could, her stomach churning at the sight of torn flesh. She sterilized the needle and thread in the flame of the stove. She had to touch him. She had to push the needle through the skin of this dangerous, unknown man. As she worked, her hands shaking but her movements becoming steady, she saw him. His body was hard, not with the vanity of a gym, but the dense, functional muscle of a fighter. His skin was covered in scars, not just the gunshot. There were old, faded white lines, knife wounds, she realized. And there were tattoos. Dark ink snaked up his arm, disappearing under his sleeve, across his ribs, opposite the wound. She saw a complex design, wings, a crest, and a name in swirling script she couldn't read. This man was not a hiker who'd had an accident. This man lived a life where getting shot and stitched up in a cabin by a stranger was preferable to a hospital. She was stitching up a man just like Jared, maybe worse. It took her nearly an hour. Her stitches were clumsy, ugly things, but they pulled the skin closed. They held. She taped a thick pad of gauze over the wound and finally sat back on her heels, exhausted and covered in his blood. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair, the poker back in her hands, and watched him breathe. He woke with the dawn. Alina must have dozed off, her head dropping to her chest. A small noise, the shifting of weight on the cot she'd dragged him to, snapped her awake. His eyes were open, and they were on her. He wasn't delirious anymore. He was absolutely, frighteningly alert. He sat up in one fluid motion, ignoring the pull of her stitches, his gaze sweeping the room, cataloging its contents, its exits, and her. He was a predator. "Where am I?" His voice was a low gravel, rough from pain. "A cabin in the mountains," Alina said, her voice tight. She kept her grip on the poker. "You collapsed on my porch last night. You were shot." His hand went to his side, his fingers probing the rough bandage. He looked at her, and his eyes narrowed. "You did this?" She nodded, unable to speak. "Did you call anyone?" His tone was flat, cold, an interrogation. "No, you said not to." He held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. He was assessing her, and she felt stripped bare. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Alina." She offered nothing else. "Who are you?" He ignored the question. He swung his legs over the side of the cot, his jaw tight as pain clearly shot through him. He was wearing his pants, still damp, but she had taken his boots off. His bare feet hit the cold floor. "I need my clothes," he said. "They're drying by the stove. Your coat is ruined." He saw his coat, a bloody, muddy heap. He looked at his shirt, cut to ribbons. Then he looked at her again. The tension in the tiny room was so thick it was hard to breathe. He was a tightly coiled spring, a creature of violence, and she was trapped with him. He was cryptic. He offered no name, no explanation. He simply stated he needed to rest. "I'll stay a few days," he said. It wasn't a request. "While I recover." "You can't," she said, the words weaker than she wanted. "You have to leave." "I can't." He met her eyes, and there was no menace in his expression, just a flat statement of fact. "Not like this. I won't bring you any more trouble than I already have, but I'm not leaving until I can stand on my own." She was terrified, but she was also practical. He was right. He was too weak to move, and she wasn't strong enough to force him out. The next few days were an agony of suspense. Alina didn't trust him for a second. His name, she learned by accident when he was muttering in a pain-filled daze, was Vincent. He said nothing else. He spent most of his time on the cot, sleeping or staring at the ceiling. But when he was awake, he watched her. It was not a leering gaze. It was an unnerving, analytical study. He watched how she moved, how she stoked the fire, how she startled at the sound of a falling pine cone. He was studying her, mapping her, and she felt like a mouse being observed by a hawk. The tension was a living thing in the cabin. She would be washing their few dishes, and she would feel his eyes on her back, a physical weight. He barely spoke, answering her few, necessary questions with a nod or a single word. He refused her help, changing his own bandage with grim, practiced efficiency. She didn't trust him, and he, she knew, did not trust her. On the third night, the stress finally broke her. She'd fallen into a fitful, exhausted sleep in the chair, the poker resting against her knees. The dreams came, as they always did. Jared's face, smiling, his hand tracing her jaw before tightening. The smell of his expensive cologne, a scent that now made her stomach clench. The sound of his voice, low and persuasive, telling her she was worthless, that she was his. She woke with a choked gasp, her body rigid, her hands flailing for a weapon. Alina. Vincent was standing over her. He hadn't moved from the cot. He was standing by her chair, a dark, intimidating shape in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. She stared at him, her heart trying to escape her chest, the remnants of the nightmare clinging to her. "You were dreaming," he said. His voice was different, not soft but quiet, the abrasive edge worn smooth. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a silent guardian. And something about his stillness, his simple presence, broke the dam she had so carefully constructed. She'd been strong for months. She had escaped. She had survived. She had stitched up a wounded criminal in the middle of a storm. But the terror of the nightmare, combined with the impossible tension of the last 3 days, was too much. Alina Moore put her face in her hands and, for the first time since leaving Charleston, she cried. It was not a gentle weeping. It was a raw, silent, agonizing storm of sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her old life, for her fear, for her loneliness, for the man in her dreams and the man standing in front of her. Vincent didn't move. He didn't pat her shoulder or offer useless words. He just stood there, his presence a solid, unmoving object in her collapsing world. He waited. He watched. Not as an analyst, but as a witness, and for a few strange moments. Alina wept in front of a stranger, and she wasn't afraid. The morning after her breakdown was stiff and quiet. Alina avoided his eyes, embarrassed by the raw, animal noise of her grief. She had shown weakness, a thing Jared had always punished her for, and she expected Vincent to use it against her. He did not. He merely accepted the cup of thin, bitter coffee she offered, his expression unreadable. As the days passed, Vincent's body began to knit itself back together. The man who had collapsed on her doorstep was a creature of pain and delirium, but the man emerging was something else entirely. He was possessed by a restless, caged energy. On the third morning, he swung his legs off the cot and stood, testing his full weight. He inhaled sharply as the stitches pulled, but his face remained a mask of stone. "You shouldn't be moving," Alina said, her voice tight. "I can't sit," he replied, his voice a low gravel. He walked to the door and looked out at the dense, damp woods. He was a man of action, and the forced stillness was a different kind of wound. Their truce was formed not with words, but with labor. He could not be idle. He found the cabin's rusted axe head in the shed and spent an afternoon sharpening it with a whetstone he discovered in a rotting drawer. The methodical, abrasive shing, shing, shing of the stone set Alina's teeth on edge, but she said nothing. The next day, he began to chop wood. Alina watched from the window. He had insisted on doing it, despite her protests that he would reopen his wound. He moved stiffly at first, his swings measured, but as his muscles warmed, a rhythm took over. He was wearing the clothes she had washed for him, his dark pants and a faded flannel shirt she'd found in a chest, which stretched tight across his shoulders. The thwack of the axe biting into pine echoed through the small clearing. It was a powerful, definitive sound, a violent contrast to the whispering quiet she had surrounded herself with. Each swing was a testament to the strength he was rapidly regaining. He was not just healing, he was reforming. He worked for hours, stopping only when he was clearly in pain, his hand pressed to his side. He never complained. When the woodpile was high, he turned his attention to the cabin itself. He found the loose shingles she had missed, and with a grunt, hauled the ancient ladder against the wall. "You can't," she insisted, standing at the base. "You'll fall. That wound, hold the ladder," he commanded, and the discussion was over. She held it, her hands gripping the rotting wood, her neck craned as she watched him move above her. He worked with an economy of motion, his large hands surprisingly deft as he hammered the old shingles back into place. They were a strange team, the woman hiding from the world, and the man who seemed built to conquer it. The cabin slowly became warmer, more secure. The roof no longer leaked. The woodpile promised heat for weeks. Vincent, in his silent, forceful way, was bringing the place back to life. And as the physical space grew warmer, so did the silence between them. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of fear, but something thinner, more porous. Alina began to talk. She filled the space with trivial things, small, safe pieces of herself. She talked about the book she was reading, an old paperback she'd found with a cracked spine. She talked about the deer she'd seen by the spring. She never talked about Charleston. She never mentioned a past, a family, or a life before this mountain. Vincent was a good listener. He would sit, cleaning the small handgun she had found in his coat pocket, a discovery that had terrified her, but which he treated with the casual familiarity of a carpenter handling a hammer, and he would just nod. His eyes focused on his task, absorbing her words. He sensed she was running. A woman this resourceful, this intelligent, and this profoundly terrified did not end up in a derelict cabin by choice. He could feel the shape of the secret she was holding, a dark, heavy thing. He recognized it. He had secrets of his own. He respected her distance. One afternoon, almost a week after his arrival, the Indian summer sun beat down, turning the clearing humid. Alina had been trying to scrub the last of the mildew from the windowsills when she heard him working outside, the steady splitting of logs. When the sound stopped, she glanced outside. He was standing by the woodpile, shirtless. Alina froze, her hand still on the rag. He had stripped off the flannel shirt and was using it to wipe the sweat from his neck and face. His back was to her. It was a roadmap of violence. She had seen the faded white lines on his chest when she stitched him, but his back was a different story. A long, puckered scar ran diagonally from his left shoulder blade to his right hip, the result of a blade meant to sever. Smaller, angrier scars littered his skin, testaments to old battles she could not and did not want to imagine. His body was dense, powerful, the muscles of his back and shoulders moving with a fluid grace as he bent to stack a log. He was nothing like Jared. Jared's violence was sloppy, emotional, the angry outbursts of a bully. This man, Vincent, his body was an instrument, hardened and scarred by a life of deliberate, dangerous purpose. She should have been repulsed. She should have seen him as a monster, no different from the one she had fled. But as she watched the sunlight catch the hard, defined lines of his shoulders, she felt something else, a slow, pulling warmth low in her stomach. It was a dangerous, unwelcome feeling, an attraction that felt like a betrayal of her own survival. He stopped, his head cocked, as if sensing her gaze. He turned slowly. Alina's breath hitched. He had caught her staring, her face flooded with heat, and she made a move to step back from the window. But it was too late. His eyes met hers. He was too far away for her to read his expression clearly, but she saw the slight tilt of his head, and then she saw his lips curve into a slow, knowing smirk. It was the first time she had seen anything on his face besides pain or guarded neutrality. He did not look away. He held her gaze, a silent, challenging tease, the mood between them, the fragile, domestic truce they had built, shattered in an instant. It was replaced by something electric and far more dangerous. She was the one who broke contact, pulling back from the window as if burned, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was not just her patient, he was not her protector. He was a man, and he knew she had been looking. That night, the tension was unbearable. They had been eating their meals in a near-complete, functional silence, but tonight, the quiet was loaded. She had lit 2 candles on the table, the cabin's meager generator having finally run out of fuel. The small space was cast in flickering, intimate shadows. Alina was hyper-aware of him, the way his hand, large and scarred, wrapped around his water glass. The way his eyes, a deep, piercing blue in the firelight, seemed to catch and hold hers for a second too long. The silences stretched, no longer awkward but filled with unspoken questions. She found herself stealing glances at him. He ate with the same deliberate focus he applied to everything, yet he seemed relaxed. His shoulders, which were usually held in a tight line of control, slightly slumped. He caught her looking again. This time, he did not smirk. He simply held her gaze. "You're a good cook," he said, his voice low, nodding toward the canned stew she had tried to improve with wild herbs. "It's just stew," she murmured, looking down at her plate. "Better than I've had in a long time," he said. The compliment hung in the air, simple and sincere, and it unbalanced her more than his smirk had. A sudden sound cut through the night. It was distant, metallic, and grinding. The unmistakable sound of a vehicle engine. Climbing the old logging road far down the mountain. Alina went rigid. The spoon fell from her hand, clattering loudly onto her plate. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin a stark, waxy white in the candlelight. Her eyes flew to the door, wide with a primal terror Vincent had not seen since the night of her nightmare. She looked like a deer cornered by wolves, her entire body vibrating, ready to bolt. "Alina!" She didn't hear him. She was already half out of her chair, backing away from the table, her hands raised as if to ward off a blow. "They found me," she whispered. The words choked with panic. "Oh God, he found me!" Vincent was on his feet in an instant. The relaxed man was gone, replaced by the predator. He moved to the window, peering out into the blackness, listening. The sound was already fading, the car continuing on the road below, not turning up her private path. He turned back to her. She was flattened against the far wall, her chest heaving, her eyes still locked on the door. His patience, worn thin by his own secrets and the liability of her panic, finally snapped. This was not a nightmare. This was real. Her fear was a beacon, and it was going to get them both killed. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he invading her space, blocking her escape. "Who?" he demanded, his voice a low, hard command. "Who is he?" "Please," she whimpered, shaking her head. "No more secrets," Vincent growled. "You're running. You brought this fear with you. I want a name. Who are you hiding from?" The force of his demand, the sheer, contained power in his voice, broke through her panic. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a threat, but an immovable object. The story spilled out of her, a torrent of whispered, broken confessions. She told him about Jared Blake, about his charm, and the cold, dead emptiness behind his eyes. She told him about the control, the isolation, the casual violence, and the way his influence in Charleston's underworld had grown until he was untouchable. "He said he'd kill me before he let me go," she finished, her voice flat, her body finally slumping against the wall, the adrenaline gone. "He said I was his. He's not just a man. He's a monster." Vincent stared at her, his expression hard. He did not offer sympathy. He did not tell her she was safe. He was processing the information. He knew men like Jared Blake. He ran a world full of them. His jaw tightened, a single muscle nodding near his ear. He understood now. This was not a lover's quarrel. This was an escape. He stepped back, giving her space. "He won't find you here," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a promise, delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who dealt in blood and consequences. Alina stared at him, her breath still catching. She believed him. Later that night, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. The cabin was silent again, the dishes from their interrupted dinner sitting in the small basin. Alina forced herself to move, to reclaim the small domestic routine. She began to wash the dishes, her back to the room. She sensed him before she heard him. A shift in the air, the subtle sound of a floorboard creaking under a heavy weight. He moved with a silence that was unnerving for a man his size. He came to stand directly behind her. Alina tensed, her hands freezing in the soapy water. Jared used to do this, standing so close she could feel his breath on her neck, a prelude to either a kiss or a shove. Vincent did not touch her. He just stood there, his presence a solid wall of heat at her back. He was so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of the soap she'd given him, mixed with the smoky scent of the fire. His hands, she saw in her periphery, were resting on the counter on either side of her, his arms brushing hers, caging her in, but not holding her. It was a possessive, protective stance. He leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. His voice was a low murmur, vibrating through her. "You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." The words, his promise from earlier, landed differently now. It was intimate, a vow spoken in the dark. She stopped breathing. Slowly, she turned around, her hands dripping water onto the floor. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. She was trapped between his arms and the sink, enveloped in his magnetic field. His eyes were dark in the shadows, focused entirely on her. He was not the cold, wounded stranger. He was not the demanding interrogator. He was just Vincent. He watched her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air crackled, thick with the unsaid. He wanted her. She could see it. And God help her. She was not, in that moment, afraid of it. His head tilted, lowering slowly. He was going to kiss her. She saw his eyelids flicker. Her own fear, ingrained and reflexive, slammed into her. Alina pulled back, her hands coming up to press against his chest. "I can't," she whispered, the words sounding weak. Even to her, she was terrified, not of him, but of the feeling, of the magnetism, of letting any man that close again, least of all one who lived in the same dark world she had just escaped. It felt like walking back into the fire. Vincent stopped instantly. He did not push. He did not grip her arms or demand to know why. He simply held her gaze, and she saw a flash of something in his eyes, not anger, but a deep, burning frustration, a flicker of heat. He held her stare for one more second, then straightened up. He dropped his arms, stepping back, releasing her from the cage of his body. Without a word, he turned and walked to the cot, presenting her with his scarred, rigid back. He did not look at her again, but Alina could still feel the phantom heat of his body, and she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that his eyes were burning in the dark. Her act of pulling away, of denying him, had reset the air in the cabin. The following days were quiet, but the quiet had changed. The tension of fear was gone, replaced by the heavy, humming tension of awareness. Alina no longer watched him as if he were a bomb that might detonate. She watched him as if he were a fire she was afraid to get too close to. She found herself trusting him in small, incremental ways. She no longer slept with the fireplace poker in her hand. She turned her back to him while she cooked. She learned the cadence of his movements, the heavy, sure step of his boots on the floorboards, the low, rough sound of his voice in the morning, the way he would sit for an hour at a time, staring into the fire, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away. He was not just a criminal. He was not Jared. Jared's violence was chaotic and selfish. Vincent's stillness was a form of control, but it felt different. It felt contained. She saw the pain in him, a deep, old ache that had nothing to do with the gunshot wound. She saw it in the way he rubbed the back of his neck, in the hard line of his jaw when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a strange, grim honor in the way he'd chopped her wood and fixed her roof, as if he were paying a debt for the blood he'd brought into her home. One evening, while the wind howled outside, she finally asked, "Who shot you?" "Vincent." He was cleaning his gun again, the pieces laid out on a rag on the table. The firelight caught the oiled metal. He didn't look up, his large, scarred hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Someone I trusted," he said, his voice flat. "A friend." He gave a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "There are no friends in my business, only associates and liabilities." "What is your business?" she asked, though she already knew. The tattoos, the gun, the scars, the way he'd refused a hospital, it all added up to one thing. He finally stopped, clicking the weapon back together with a final, definitive snap. He looked at her, his blue eyes cold in the firelight. He seemed to be debating, not whether to trust her, but whether it mattered. "My family," he said, "is the DeLuca family. You heard of us?" Alina's blood ran cold. Even in Charleston, she'd heard the name. The DeLucas. They weren't a local gang like Jared's. They were old world, organized, and they ran half the shipping and unions on the coast. They were real. "I thought," she whispered, "you were just a soldier." "I was," he said, and the exhaustion in his voice was profound. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was a foot soldier my whole life. It was all I ever wanted to be. My brother, Leo, he was the boss. He was the one with the head for it, the charm, the strategy. He was born to run things." He stared into the flames, his gaze unfocused, seeing a past she couldn't. "I was the muscle, the shadow. Leo made the plans, and I made sure they were followed. It was simple. I was good at it." "What happened?" Alina asked, her voice soft. Vincent's jaw tightened. He got careless. He trusted the wrong people. A meeting he should have never taken. They put a bomb in his car. I was the one who found him. Alina closed her eyes, a sharp, sympathetic pain lancing through her. "The old men," Vincent continued, his voice a low, bitter rumble. "They came to me. Leo was gone. I was next in line. The throne was mine. I told them no. I told them to give it to my cousin. They said it had to be me, for stability, for strength, to show no weakness." He looked at her, and his eyes were hollow. "So I took it. I took this life I never wanted. I sit in rooms I hate, with men I despise, and I make decisions that put men in the ground. I am a king in a kingdom of dirt." He leaned back, the cot groaning under his weight. "And one of my subjects finally got brave enough to try and take the crown. That's who shot me." They sat in silence. The fire crackled, the only sound in the small, warm room. Alina finally understood. She saw him, truly saw him for the first time. He was trapped, just like her. Her cage had been a violent relationship, a single, terrifying man. His was a legacy, a name, an empire of blood he couldn't escape. They were both survivors of a life they hadn't chosen. "You're lonely," she said. It wasn't a question. His gaze snapped to hers. It was the first time she had ever seen him look vulnerable, as if she had struck a nerve no one else had ever dared to touch. "We all are," he said gruffly, looking away. But the connection was made. He was no longer just a dangerous man. He was Vincent. And he was the only person in the world who understood the precise shape of her own fear and regret. He saw her, not as a victim, but as a fellow prisoner. 2 days later, Vincent's wound was a puckered, healing line. His strength was back. He was prowling the small cabin like a panther in a zoo cage. "We're out of food," he stated. "Real food. I need to go to town." Alina's heart seized. "Town? No, it's not safe. I can forage. You can't live on roots and canned beans. Alina, and I need to see something." He picked up her car keys from the hook by the door. "I'll be back in 2 hours. Bar the door behind me." She wanted to argue, but the look on his face told her it was pointless. She watched him walk to her beat-up sedan, his powerful frame folding into the small car. He started the engine, and the sound of it, so loud in the wilderness, felt like a betrayal. The 2 hours he was gone were the longest of her life. The silence of the cabin, which had become a comfort, was now a hollow, ringing void. She was alone again, and she realized, with a terrifying jolt, that she didn't want to be. She had grown used to his presence, his solid, dangerous certainty. Vincent drove to the small, one-street town at the base of the mountain. He parked in front of a general store, the only one for 50 miles. He pulled his wool cap low, his collar high. He just needed supplies: coffee, flour, bacon, jerky, and he was at the counter, paying in cash, when he heard it. The store's owner, a wiry man in overalls, was talking to another local. Told him I hadn't seen anyone. The owner was saying, but he was real insistent, from the city. You could tell, fancy coat. What did he want? Asked about a woman. Dark hair, pretty. Maybe looked scared. Said she might be hiding out in one of the old hunting cabins up the pass. Offered $500 for a single word. Vincent's blood turned to ice. His entire body went on high alert, the casual slouch gone, replaced by the rigid posture of a predator. He turned his head slowly. "Someone asking about a woman?" he asked, his voice casual. The owner sized him up. "Yeah, you know anything?" Vincent gave a small, disarming shrug. "Just curious. Sounds like someone's in trouble." "Sounds like it," the owner said, his gaze suspicious. Vincent grabbed his bag. "Thanks," he muttered, and walked out. He didn't run to the car. He moved with a deliberate, controlled speed. Jarrett, it had to be. He had found her trail. He was close. The drive back up the mountain was a blur of adrenaline and cold, calculated rage. He took the hairpin turns at a speed that made the old sedan's tires scream. He burst into the cabin, slamming the door. Alina jumped, dropping the book she was holding. He threw the bag of supplies onto the table. "We're leaving," he said, his voice a low, terrifying command. "Now, pack your bag." Alina stared at him, her face pale. "What? What happened?" "He's here." "Jared?" The name was a choked whisper. "I don't know," Vincent snapped, his patience gone. "But someone's in town, asking about a dark-haired woman, offering money. Your ex is sloppy and he's close." He grabbed her bag from the corner and threw it onto the cot. "Pack. We have 10 minutes." Alina just stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with the old, familiar terror. He had found her. He had found her. "No," she whispered. Vincent stopped, his back to her. He turned around slowly. "What did you say?" "No." Her voice was stronger now, shaking but full of a new, cold defiance. "I'm not running. I'm done running, Vincent." "This is not a discussion," he growled, stepping toward her. "He finds you. He will kill you. Or worse, we are leaving." "And where will we go?" she cried, her fear turning to a desperate, hot anger. "Another cabin, another town, and when he finds me again, we run again. I ran from him, and I ended up trapped here. I'm tired of being the prey." "This isn't about being prey," he shouted, his frustration exploding. He was angry at Jared, at his own situation, but most of all, at her suicidal stubbornness. He grabbed her by the arms, his grip bruising. "This is my world, Alina. You don't understand the rules. Men like him, men like me, we don't stop until we have what we want. You can't fight him. And I can't run forever." She shoved him, her palms flat against his chest. It was like pushing against a brick wall, but the act of defiance felt good. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of my entire life being defined by him. I would rather die here, on my feet, than spend one more day looking over my shoulder." The cabin was electric, the air thick with their shared fury. They were inches apart, chests heaving, their anger a tangible thing between them. The fight was not about leaving. It was about her life, and his. "You don't get to die," he said, his voice raw, his grip on her arms tightening. "I'm trying to keep you alive. And I am trying to live," she screamed back at him, tears of rage blurring her vision. The words hung in the air. The sound of her cry, the raw, desperate plea for a life, broke something in him. His anger, his fear for her, and the undeniable, simmering desire he had kept banked for days. All of it collided. His eyes dropped to her mouth. He stared at her, breathing hard. His expression a war of violence and a deeper, more profound need. And then he was kissing her. It was not gentle. It was a collision, hard and desperate, a release of all the pressure, all the fear, all the anger. His mouth claimed hers, a bruising, possessive act. His one hand tangled in her hair, gripping the back of her head to hold her steady, while the other arm snaked around her waist, yanking her flush against him. Alina's hands, which had been pushing him away, fisted in the front of his shirt, holding on as if she were drowning. She kissed him back with the same desperate, angry force. This was not a surrender. It was a fight. A battle of wills, a mutual claiming. Then, as quickly as it began, the violence of it gentled, the hard, desperate pressure of his mouth softened. The kiss, which had been an act of possession, became one of exploration. His tongue traced her lips, asking a question. His hand in her hair gentled, his thumb stroking the skin behind her ear. He slowed, deepening the kiss, turning it from a desperate act into a tender one. He was learning her, and she was letting him. She whimpered, a small sound of pure, unadulterated need. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. Alina looked at him, at his strong, harsh face, now softened by a desire that mirrored her own. She was not afraid. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid. She made her choice. She took his large, scarred hand in her small, trembling one. She didn't speak. She just tugged, leading him the 2 steps toward the cot, her cot, the only bed in the room. He followed, his eyes never leaving hers. He sat, pulling her down with him. The small, rickety bed groaned. He was watching her, his gaze intense, searching her face, looking for any sign of fear or hesitation. She gave him none. She raised her hands and began to slowly unbutton her own shirt. He stopped her, his hand closing over hers. "Alina," he said, his voice thick. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not afraid." His touch was the most surprising thing she had ever known. For a man built of such hard lines and violent purpose, his hands were incredibly gentle. He unbuttoned her shirt, his knuckles brushing her skin, the calloused pads of his fingers sending shivers through her. He pushed the fabric aside, his gaze reverent as he looked at her. He leaned in and kissed the hollow of her throat, a soft, warm press of lips that made her entire body weak. This was not the sloppy, selfish fumbling of Jared. This was deliberate. This was worship. She arched into him, her hands going to his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw, the rough stubble. He kissed her again, deeply, and she fell back onto the rough wool blankets, pulling him down with her. It was emotionally raw. It was the frantic, desperate coupling of 2 people who had been starved of connection, of touch, of safety. He was surprisingly gentle, his movements controlled, his body heavy and hot above her. He was watching her face in the dim, fire-lit room, his expression taut with a mixture of intense desire and a vulnerability she had never seen. When he finally entered her, she gasped, but it was not from pain. It was from the sheer, overwhelming relief of it. It was a joining, a connection so profound it stole her breath. She surrendered to him, to the feeling, to the moment. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, finally letting go, allowing herself to be held and claimed by a man she trusted. It was a release, a reclamation of her own body, a surrendering that felt, for the first time, like victory. After, they lay tangled in the blankets, the tiny cabin silent except for the sound of their breathing and the dying fire. The adrenaline was gone, the passion faded, and in its place, the emotional dam inside Alina finally broke. She began to cry, not the angry, frustrated tears from the fight, but the deep, racking sobs of a woman who had been holding her breath for years. She cried for her lost life, for the fear she had lived with, and for the overwhelming, terrifying relief of the last hour. Vincent didn't speak. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tightly. He stroked her hair, his large hand a solid, comforting weight. He let her break, absorbing her grief into his own solid, silent strength, holding her as if he could, by force of will alone, keep the rest of the world at bay. Much later, when her sobs had faded into the deep, even breaths of exhausted sleep, Vincent lay awake. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a faint red light over the room. He stared at the ceiling, Alina's head a warm, trusting weight on his shoulder. He looked down at her face, peaceful in the shadows, her tear tracks still glistening on her cheeks. He had felt her surrender, the total, unconditional trust she had given him. It was a gift he knew he didn't deserve. A cold, hard rage, different from any he had ever known, settled in his chest. It was a protective instinct so fierce it was almost painful. He had brought this trouble to her door. Jared was a symptom, but Vincent knew his world. The one that had sent him here bleeding was the true disease. He would not let her run again, and he would not let her be found. He would protect her. No matter the cost, he would burn down the world, his and hers, to keep her safe. He watched her sleep, and he made a silent, blood-deep vow. The peace that followed was a fragile, breathing thing. For a full day, the cabin was not a prison or a fortress, but a home. They moved around each other with a new, quiet intimacy. The air, once thick with tension, was now charged with a different energy, a shared secret. They talked, really talked, their pasts laid bare. They cooked together, their hands brushing, and slept in the small cot. Alina's back pressed against Vincent's solid chest. She had not felt this safe in years, perhaps ever. But the man who had vowed to protect her was a man born of shadows, and he could not rest. The peace did not last. On the second morning, Vincent rose before dawn. Alina felt the cold air hit her back as he slipped from the bed. She watched him pull on his boots, his movements silent and fluid. "Where are you going?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Just checking the perimeter," he said. He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead. The gesture was so tender it ached. "Go back to sleep." But she couldn't. She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, and watched the door close behind him. The silence of the cabin was suddenly ominous again. Vincent moved through the pre-dawn gloom like a ghost. He wasn't just checking. He was hunting. His instincts, honed by a lifetime of war, were screaming the day before. He'd told himself the feeling was just the newness of Alina, the vulnerability of letting someone in. Now, he knew it was a lie. He was being watched. He didn't walk the path. He moved through the trees, a shadow among shadows. He circled his way down toward the overgrown logging road, and he found it. A footprint, clear and deep in a patch of damp earth, half hidden by a fern. It was a heavy boot print, a waffle sole pattern. Not his, not hers. His blood ran cold. He crouched, his gaze sweeping the ground. He found another, and another. Someone had been here, moving carelessly, probably in the dark. He followed the trail for 100 yards, his anger a cold, rising bile. A branch, thick as his thumb, was snapped at chest height, the wood inside still white and fresh. They had come this close. They had surveyed the cabin. He was turning back, his mind already spinning with logistics, the car, the gas, the direction, when a glint of brass caught his eye. He knelt by a large oak. There, nestled in the dead leaves, was a single bullet casing. He picked it up, 9mm, standard issue. He sniffed the rim. It was fresh, fired within the last 48 hours. They hadn't just been watching. They had been waiting. He crushed the casing in his fist, Jared or his own people. It didn't matter. The sanctuary was breached. He stormed back into the cabin, his face a mask of cold fury. Alina was standing by the stove, her face pale with worry. "Pack, now," he said, his voice flat. "What? Vincent, what did you see?" "Footprints, a broken branch, a shell casing. They know we're here. Alina, they're already here." He yanked her bag open and began shoving her few clothes into it. The old terror, the one she had held at bay for 2 days, slammed back into her. Her legs went weak, her vision tunneling. She couldn't breathe. She backed against the wall, her hands flat against the cold wood. "No," she whispered. "No, I can't run again. Alina, this is not the time." Vincent's frustration erupted. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip hard, trying to shake her from the paralysis. "They are here. Do you understand me? They are coming to kill us." His words, meant to spur her to action, only drove the spike of fear deeper. She was frozen, her eyes wide and blank, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was gone, lost in a memory of Jared's hand on her throat. Vincent saw it. He saw the woman he had held, the one who had fought him and kissed him, disappear. replaced by a ghost. His anger evaporated, replaced by a desperate, aching tenderness. He softened his grip, his hands sliding from her shoulders to her arms, holding her. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me. Look at me. Alina." She dragged her gaze to his, tears welling. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice low and fierce. "But you're not alone this time. Do you hear me? I am with you." He brought one hand up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I will not let them touch you. I swear to God, I will put every last one of them in the ground before they take one step toward you. But you have to trust me. You have to move. Now. Can you do that for me?" She stared at him, her breath hitching. His promise was not a soft comfort. It was a vow of violence, and it was the only thing that could have reached her. She nodded, a single, jerky motion. "Good girl," he breathed. "Get your coat." As they prepared, the cabin was a flurry of frantic, terrified energy. Alina, her hands still shaking, zipped her bag. Vincent was a machine of grim efficiency. He shoved his few things into his own bag, checked the magazine on his handgun, and slid it into the waistband at the small of his back. "Keys," he said. "Where are the keys?" "On the hook," Alina said, pointing. He grabbed them. "Okay, we go to the car. We don't stop. You get in the passenger side, and you lock the door. You do not look back. You just get in. Understood?" She nodded again. He took one last look around the small room, the place he had healed, the place he had found her. He grabbed her hand. "Now." He pulled the door open, and the world exploded. It was not a shootout. It was an ambush. Two men burst from the tree line, their dark shapes emerging from the night. A third, taller figure stood back by the trees, a silhouette of pure menace. Alina saw his face, illuminated by the flashlight he held. Jared. His smile was a white slash in the dark. "Going somewhere, baby," he called out, his voice a mocking sing-song. The first man raised his gun. Vincent didn't hesitate. He shoved Alina back into the cabin, spinning in front of her as a bullet shattered the doorframe where her head had been. Splinters stung her cheek. "Get down! Stay away from the window!" he roared. He drew his own weapon, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. He didn't aim. He fired 2 quick shots through the doorway, a suppression tactic. He heard a grunt of surprise. "Come on out, hero!" Jared yelled from the darkness. "Send my girl out and I'll let you walk away." "Like hell," Vincent muttered. He grabbed Alina's arm. "The back window. It's our only chance. Go." The window was small, stuck with old paint, but it led to the back of the cabin, toward the shed where the car was hidden. Vincent smashed the glass with the butt of his gun. "Go! Go!" Alina scrambled through, cutting her hand on a shard of glass. She landed hard in the mud outside. Vincent was right behind her, a large, protective shadow. A man was circling the cabin. He saw them, his eyes wide, and he raised his pistol. Alina screamed. Vincent moved with a speed that was terrifying. He didn't even seem to aim. His gun barked twice. The sound was flat, ugly. The man clutched his chest, a dark stain blossoming on his shirt. He looked down, his expression one of pure, blank surprise, and then he crumpled to the ground. Jared screamed, a sound of pure animal rage. "He's in the back! Get him!" The other man came running, firing blindly into the dark. Bullets thwacked into the log walls of the cabin. "The car! Run!" Vincent yelled. He grabbed Alina's hand and pulled her. Stumbling through the mud and wet leaves, the car was 20 yards away. A bullet whined past Vincent's ear. He spun, dropping to one knee, and fired 3 times toward the muzzle flash. He heard a cry of pain and the sound of someone falling, followed by a string of curses. He had hit the second man, but not killed him. "Vincent!" Alina shrieked from the car. He sprinted the last few feet, diving into the driver's seat as a bullet shattered the rear windshield. Glass sprayed over them. "Stay down!" he yelled. He jammed the key into the ignition. The old sedan's engine turned over, whined, and caught with a roar. Jared appeared from the side, his face contorted. He was leveling his own gun at the driver's side window. At Vincent. Alina reacted without thinking. She lunged across the console, grabbing the steering wheel and yanking it hard, the car already in reverse. shot backward at a sharp angle. Jared's bullet went wide, punching a hole in the door where Vincent's head had been. Vincent slammed the car into drive. The tires spun, spitting mud, and then they found purchase. He floored the accelerator. The sedan shot forward, barreling down the hidden path, crashing through the undergrowth. Alina looked back. She saw Jared standing in the glare of the taillights, a furious, thwarted silhouette, growing smaller and smaller until the trees swallowed him whole. They fled. Vincent drove with a focused, terrifying intensity, his hands locked on the wheel. He careened down the winding mountain roads, the tires screaming at every hairpin turn. The damaged car rattling so hard, Alina was sure it would fall apart. She was rigid in her seat, her cut hand pressed to her mouth, the coppery taste of her own blood mixing with the sour taste of fear. They didn't speak for nearly an hour. Vincent didn't slow until they hit the main highway, merging with the sparse pre-dawn traffic. He drove for another 2 hours, heading south, putting as many miles as possible between them and the mountain. Finally. He pulled off the highway and into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of a motel. The Sleepy Haven sign was missing the S, and the vacancy light flickered a diseased pink. It was perfect. He paid in cash, his face hidden by his cap. The room smelled of stale smoke, bleach, and despair. Alina walked in and sat on the edge of the stiff, polyester bedspread, her body numb, her mind a blank. Replaying the sound of the gunshots, Vincent locked the deadbolt, chained the door, and wedged the room's single chair under the knob. Only then did he turn to her. She was shaking, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "They found me," she whispered, her voice hollow. "It's my fault. I brought this to you. That man." "This is not your fault," Vincent said, his voice rough. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. He saw the gash on her palm. His expression tightened. "Alina, this is not on you." He went into the grime-caked bathroom and came back with a damp, thin towel. He began to gently clean her wound. "You're blaming yourself," he said, his voice low as he worked. This was never about you just running from an ex. This was bigger. I knew it. I just didn't." "What?" she asked, looking at his bruised knuckles, at a long, shallow graze on his forearm that was weeping blood. "What do you mean?" She got up and pulled him to the bathroom sink. She turned on the tap, and a stream of rust-colored water sputtered out before running clear. She took the small, paper-wrapped bar of soap and began to tend to his graze. "You never told me," she said, her voice quiet, the shock giving way to a need for answers. "Why were you at the cabin in the first place? You weren't just hiking." Vincent watched her, his expression grim. She was tending to him, her touch gentle, even after what she had just seen him do. "I was betrayed," he said, his voice flat. "Someone in my organization, someone I trusted, set me up. They arranged a peace meeting with a rival. It was an ambush. I fought my way out, but I was shot. The cabin, it was supposed to be a safe house, one only my brother and I knew about, or so I thought." He met her eyes in the mirror. "Someone sent me there to die. They sent me there to be collected, either by them or by the rivals I just escaped." Alina's hands stilled. "Jared, he's just a local thug. He's violent, but he's not smart. He doesn't have the resources to track me across 3 states. Not that fast." A cold, terrible understanding settled between them. "Unless he had help," Vincent finished, his voice like stone. "Unless the same people who set me up are the ones who tipped him off. Using him to find me," Alina whispered, so they could use you to find me, or to flush me out." He slammed his uninjured hand against the counter, rattling the thin mirror. "They connected us, and they used you as bait." The anger rolling off him was a palpable thing, a cold, dark fire. This was not just about survival anymore. This was not just about Jared. This was about his family, his organization, his life. They had crossed a line. They had touched her. He pulled a burner phone from a hidden pocket in his bag. He flipped it open, his thumb moving quickly. He made a call. His side of the conversation was brief, coded, and brutal. "It's me. The situation is compromised. Yes, All of them. I need a secure house, off the grid, countryside. I don't care what it costs. Now. He hung up, the fire of revenge burning in his eyes. They made a mistake. They involved you. He looked at her, his expression softening just a fraction. We move at dawn. We're going to a place they can't find us. And then, I'm going to end this. He looked down at his hands, at the dried blood from the graze, at the grime from the fight. He felt coated in the filth of his life. He turned on the tap and began to scrub, his motions hard, punishing. Alina stopped him. She took his hands under the running water, her own cut stinging. She picked up the small bar of soap and, for the second time, began to clean his wounds. She methodically washed the blood and dirt from his skin, from his knuckles, from under his nails. The act was so simple, so tender. It broke through his rage. He was a killer. He had just taken a life in front of her, and she was here, washing the blood from his hands, her touch achingly gentle. He stopped, his hand closing over hers in the water. He rested his forehead against her temple, his eyes closing, his breath shuddering. "You make me feel like a man again," he whispered, his voice thick, raw with an emotion he hadn't let himself feel in a decade. Not a monster. The house was buried deep in the Virginia countryside, 100 miles from the motel, 1,000 miles from the cabin. It was a modern box of glass and steel, owned by a loyal associate of the DeLuca family, a corporate lawyer who used it for weekends he never seemed to take. It was sterile, cold, and utterly secure, with a gate, a long gravel drive, and a 360-degree view of the rolling fields. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. It was a beautiful, isolated cage. They settled into an uneasy rhythm. The trauma of the ambush had bound them together, but it had also changed them. The quiet intimacy of the cabin was gone, replaced by the grim focus of a war room. Vincent was a different man. He was no longer the wounded hermit or the tender lover. He was the boss. He spent his days on the burner phone, his voice a low, lethal instrument. He was calling in favors, tracking movements and mapping out the web of his own organization. He was hunting the mole. "Jared Blake is small time," Vincent explained, pacing the polished concrete floor, the phone in his hand. "He's a rabid dog, but he's on a leash. The people who betrayed me, my own blood, they're the ones holding it. They used his obsession with you as a tool, a way to flush me out. They wanted me dead at the cabin, but I survived, so they sent Jared to finish the job." Alina watched him, a cold knot of fear in her stomach. This was his world, a world of betrayal and strategy, and she was now, inextricably, a part of it. "So we stop Jared," she said, her voice quiet. "We cut the head off the snake," he corrected. "We find the mole. We expose him. When my organization is secure, Jared becomes an irrelevant loose end. I'll deal with him. And until then?" Vincent stopped pacing and looked at her. His eyes were hard. "Until then, you learn how to survive in my world." He took her outside the next day, into the wide, empty field behind the house. The air was crisp. He was carrying a long, heavy case. He opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a sleek, black handgun. Alina recoiled. "Vincent, no." "Yes," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He picked it up, his hand practiced and sure. "This is a 9mm. It's balanced. It's simple. You're going to learn how to use it." "I don't want to," she whispered, her hands shaking. I'm not like you." "I know," he said, his voice softening for the first time that day. He took her trembling hand and placed it on the weapon's grip, his own hand covering hers. It was cold, heavy, and dead. "I don't want you to be... but I saw your face at the cabin. You froze. I won't let that happen again." He showed her how to stand, how to brace her arms, how to align the sights. He stood behind her, his chest a solid wall against her back, his arms caging her as he helped her aim at a row of tin cans he'd set on a fence post 50 feet away. "Breathe out," he murmured, his breath warm on her ear. "Don't yank the trigger. Squeeze it. Slowly." She was terrified. Her eyes were squeezed shut when she finally pulled the trigger. The sound was a violent, deafening crack that shattered the countryside quiet. The recoil slammed her shoulders back into his chest. She cried out, dropping the gun. She was shaking, tears of fear and frustration in her eyes. "I can't. You can." He picked it up, his patience absolute. He reloaded the magazine and placed the gun back in her hands. Again. She shot again, and again she missed every time. The noise made her flinch. The violence of the explosion in her hands felt like a violation. "Stop thinking about the sound," he said, his voice calm, steady. "Stop thinking about what it's for. Just look at the target. See nothing else. Make it a part of you. Squeeze." She took a deep, shuddering breath. She raised the weapon, her arms aching. She stared at the middle can, blocking out the sound, the smell of gunpowder, the man behind her. She squeezed. The gun barked. The can pinged and flew off the fence post. Alina stared, her mouth open, her arms still locked in position. A slow smile touched Vincent's lips. He put his hand on her shoulder. Again. She did. She hit the next one, and the one after that. She was scared, yes, but beneath the fear, a cold, hard ember of determination was glowing. She was no longer the woman who froze. She was the woman who hit the target. The days that followed were a strange, surreal blend of war and peace. By day, they were soldiers. Vincent made his calls. Alina practiced with the gun until her arms ached, and they plotted how to expose the mole, tracing phone records and bank transfers Vincent had his loyal men digging up. But at night, the masks came off. The house, so cold and sterile by day, became a sanctuary. They cooked together. Real meals with fresh food a silent associate had delivered. They drank wine. They sat on the expansive deck, wrapped in blankets, and watched the sky, a vast open canvas of stars, so different from the suffocating canopy of the forest. They tried, for a few hours at a time, to pretend they were just a normal couple. Their lovemaking was different here. It was no longer the desperate, frantic coupling of the cabin. It was slow. It was healing. In the dark, in the king-sized bed, Vincent's hard edges softened. He was no longer the boss or the trainer. He was just a man. He would spend hours just touching her, his calloused fingers tracing the lines of her face, her collarbone, her hips, as if memorizing her. He learned the scars on her heart just as she had learned the scars on his back. He was a surprisingly gentle lover, his strength a form of protection. Not intimidation, he made her feel powerful, not possessed. For Alina, it was a reclamation. Jared had taken her body, treating it as his property. Vincent, the man she should have feared more than any other, was the one giving it back to her. She surrendered to him in a way she never had before, a complete and total yielding that was, paradoxically, the ultimate act of her own free will. One night she lay curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What happens after?" she whispered into the darkness. "After you find the mole? After Jared?" Vincent was silent for a long time. His hand stroked her hair. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "My life. It's not made for someone like you." "Maybe," she said, rising up on one elbow to look at him. "It's time for a different life." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, profound sadness. He wanted to believe her, but he knew the smell of gunpowder and blood never truly washed away. The peace was shattered 3 days later. Vincent was on the phone, his back to her. His entire body went rigid. The tone of his voice changed, dropping from commanding to a low, lethal snarl. "What did you say? When? How did you confirm it?" Alina watched him, her own blood turning to ice. He hung up without saying goodbye. He stood motionless for a full 10 seconds before he turned to face her. His expression was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Vincent, what is it?" "Jared," he said, his voice flat. "He's lost your trail. He's getting desperate. He's trying to smoke you out." "What did he do?" "He went back to Charleston. He grabbed someone, a woman named Sarah, a friend of yours." Alina's world tilted. Sarah. Her mousy, kind co-worker from the library, the only person who had noticed the bruises, the only one who, when Alina had said she was leaving, had slipped her $200 and said, "Don't you ever look back." "He kidnapped her," Alina whispered, her legs giving way. She sat heavily on the sofa. "Oh, God, he has Sarah. He's holding her at an old warehouse his crew uses," Vincent continued, his voice void of emotion. "He's letting the word out. He wants a trade. Her for you." "He'll kill her," Alina said, her mind racing. "He'll kill her just to make a point." "Yes," Vincent said. "It's a trap. Alina, he knows you'll come. He's probably got half his crew there, waiting for you. Or for us. So we have to go," she said, standing up, the shock already turning into a hot, determined rage. "We have to get her." "No." The word was absolute. "We're not. It's what he wants. It's suicide." "I don't care," Alina said, her voice shaking. "She's an innocent. He has her because of me. I am not trading her life for mine. We are going—" "I am not," Vincent said, his voice rising. "Risking you for her. She's collateral. It's tragic, but it's the cost of this war. My priority is protecting you." "Collateral!" Alina shrieked, her own anger finally matching his. She crossed the room and slammed her hands against his chest. "She is not collateral. She's my friend. She's the only person on this planet who helped me when I had nothing. I am not her. I am not the woman who lets her friend die in a dark room. I thought you saw that. I thought you knew who I was." He grabbed her wrists, his grip like steel. "You don't understand. This is how you lose. You let emotion drive you into a trap, and you both die. This is what he's counting on. And this," she shot back, her face inches from his, her eyes blazing, "is what makes me different from him, and different from you. I will not become a monster to save myself." He stared at her, breathing hard. He saw it, the fire. The terrified woman who had flinched at a gunshot was gone. In her place was this woman, this warrior, her jaw set, her eyes burning with a righteous, uncompromising fury. She was not asking him. She was telling him. She was willing to walk into that warehouse alone if she had to. He saw her determination, and he knew he had lost. And in that moment, he had never loved her more. He let go of her wrists. He took a step back, his own anger deflating, replaced by a grim resignation. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet. "It's a trap. He'll be expecting you to come in crying. He won't be expecting me. He won't be expecting you." He turned and walked to the gun case. "If we do this, we do it my way, fast and clean." The drive to the city was 4 hours of silent, screaming tension. They didn't go in her sedan. A black, nondescript SUV had been delivered to the house. Vincent drove, his face a stone mask. Alina sat beside him, loading magazines with steady, practiced hands. She was terrified, but her fear was cold now, honed to a fine, sharp edge. The hideout was an abandoned textile warehouse in a decaying industrial sector. They parked 3 blocks away and moved through the shadows. 2 ghosts in the dark. 2 guards at the main entrance, Vincent murmured, his eyes scanning the building. He'll have at least 2 more inside, probably on her. He's arrogant. He's not expecting a frontal assault. How do we don't use the door. Vincent pointed to a rusted fire escape that ran up the side of the building to the roof. The first guard was at the bottom of the ladder, smoking a cigarette. Before Alina could even register his presence, Vincent was on him. A shadow detaching from the wall, a hand over the mouth, a swift, brutal motion. The man slumped, unconscious, his cigarette falling to the pavement with a quiet hiss. Alina's heart was in her throat. Vincent looked at her, put a finger to his lips, and pointed up. They climbed. The metal was cold beneath her hands. On the roof, Vincent found the access hatch. It was locked from the inside. He didn't hesitate. He placed a small, dark shape on the metal, wedged something into the lock, and pulled Alina behind a ventilation unit. A muffled thump, and the lock was gone. He eased the hatch open. They were on a catwalk above a vast, dark space. Below, a single pool of light illuminated the center of the warehouse. Alina saw her, Sarah. She was tied to a metal chair, her head bowed, her mousy brown hair matted with what looked like blood. Alina's vision went red. Jared was there, pacing in front of her, talking on his phone. One other man, a heavy brute, stood near the chair. "She'll come," Jared was saying. "She's a stupid, loyal bitch. She'll come. Yeah, and her new boyfriend, too. We'll take them both. The DeLuca boss will pay a fortune to get his boy back. Or he'll pay a fortune for the body." Vincent's hand tightened on Alina's arm. He was right. It was all connected. "I take the brute." Vincent whispered in her ear, "You stay here. Stay hidden." He moved, vanishing down the catwalk stairs before she could argue. He was a shadow. The brute by the chair never even heard him. Vincent emerged from the darkness behind him. It was over in a second, a heavy thud, and the man was on the floor. Jared spun, his eyes wide, his phone clattering to the concrete. "What the—" "Alina!" Vincent roared, already moving toward Jared. Get her! Get her now!" Alina didn't wait. She scrambled down the stairs, her feet ringing on the metal. She ran toward her friend. Sarah, it's me." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "Alina, I've got you," Alina said, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the knots. Jared had tied them tight, the rope biting into Sarah's wrists. She heard the sounds of the fight behind her. Grunts, the sickening sound of a fist hitting flesh. She didn't look. She pulled her pocket knife, the one Vincent had given her, and sawed at the ropes. "He's got a gun!" Sarah screamed, her voice hoarse. Alina turned. Vincent had Jared on the ground, his fist raised, but Jared was fumbling, his hand pulling a small pistol from his ankle holster. Alina didn't think. She did what Vincent had taught her. She grabbed the gun tucked into her own waistband. She raised it, her arms locking, her stance wide. "Jared!" she screamed. He froze, his head snapping toward her. He saw her, holding the gun, her hands steady. His face was a mask of pure, stunned hatred. That second of hesitation was all Vincent needed. He brought his boot down on Jared's wrist with a sickening crunch. The gun skittered away. Vincent landed one. Brutal punch, and Jared went limp. "Now!" Vincent yelled, grabbing Alina. "We go!" He hauled Jared's unconscious form up, slinging him over one shoulder. "They'll want him," he grunted. "He's our proof." "Wait," a new voice. Another man. A fourth guard, coming from a back office. His gun raised. Vincent shoved Alina and Sarah toward the exit. "Go! Run!" Alina grabbed Sarah, pulling her. "Come on!" A gunshot, loud, deafening. Vincent cried out, a sharp, guttural sound. He stumbled, his hand flying to his shoulder. He dropped Jared's body. "Vincent!" Alina screamed. He fired twice from his hip, returned shots that made the guard dive for cover. "Go! Get to the car! Get them out of here!" He was bleeding. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his shoulder, the same shoulder he'd been shot in before, just inches away. "I'm not leaving you," she yelled. "You are!" he roared, firing again. "I'm right behind you. Now, go!" Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to freeze her. But she looked at Sarah, who was sobbing, and at Vincent, who was using his own body as a shield. She made her choice. She wasn't the victim, she was the rescuer. She grabbed Sarah. "Run!" They burst out the main doors, sprinting the 3 blocks to the SUV. Alina fumbled for the keys, her hands slick with her own sweat. She threw Sarah into the back seat and jumped into the driver's side. Where was he? The warehouse doors burst open. Vincent staggered out, his left arm hanging useless, his gun still in his right hand. He was running, but he was slowing. She slammed her hand on the horn. He saw her and sprinted the last few feet, diving into the passenger seat. "Drive!" he yelled. She floored it. The SUV's engine roared, and they fishtailed onto the street, just as the guard appeared in the doorway, firing wildly. The bullets pinged harmlessly off the back of the vehicle. Alina drove, her knuckles white, her heart hammering. She was driving 90 miles an hour through the dark city streets, Sarah sobbing in the back, Vincent breathing in short, harsh gasps beside her. She drove them to a new safe house, a sterile, high-rise apartment Vincent had on standby. She got them inside, barricading the door. Vincent made it as far as the sofa before he collapsed. Vincent, stay with me," she pleaded, her hands hovering over the new, gushing wound. "It's just the shoulder," he gritted out, his face pale, his skin clammy. "Just a minute." His eyes rolled back, and he passed out. Alina stared at him, her panic absolute. Sarah was huddled by the door, rocking back and forth. Then the training took over. The cold, determined focus. This was not the cabin. She was not the terrified, shaking girl stitching a stranger. "Sarah," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "In the bathroom. Find the first aid kit. Now. And towels. All of them." She ripped his shirt open, her hands sure. The roles were reversed. He had fallen on her doorstep, a monster she feared. Now, he was just Vincent. Her Vincent, bleeding out on her sofa. She pressed the towel to the wound, her entire body weight behind it, just as he had taught her. He had saved her. Now, she was going to save him. She looked at his pale face, at the blood soaking her hands, and she felt no fear, only rage. They were no longer running. They were done hiding. It was time to end this. Vincent woke to the smell of antiseptic and coffee. He was in the sterile, high-rise apartment, his shoulder a throbbing, white-hot mass of agony. Alina was sitting in a chair beside the sofa, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but alert. She had a clean roll of gauze in her lap. "You're awake," she said, her voice flat. "Sarah?" he grunted, trying to sit up. "Safe," Alina said, pushing him gently back down. "Your men came. About an hour after you passed out. They have her. They're taking her somewhere secure, out of state. She'll have a new name, a new life. Good." He closed his eyes, the pain and blood loss making the room spin. "The men, they're here, in the building. They're waiting for you. Get them," he said. He was done healing. He was done hiding. The time for defense was over. It was time to reclaim his life, or end it. An hour later, Vincent was sitting in an armchair, his left arm in a black sling, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. He was freshly shaven, dressed in a clean black shirt. He looked pale, but his eyes were chips of blue ice. 3 men stood before him, his top lieutenants, Marco, a broad, older man who had served his father, Sal, thin, nervous, a man who ran the numbers, and his cousin, Rico, handsome and charismatic, the man who looked so much like his dead brother, Leo. Alina stayed in the bedroom, but she left the door open a crack. She would not be hidden, but she would not interfere. "The last few weeks have been educational," Vincent began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I was betrayed. I was left for dead. The cabin, the ambush, the thug from Charleston. All of it was a single, coordinated move." He looked at each of them. "I was set up by one of my own, by someone in this room." Marco and Sal stiffened, their faces draining of color. Rico looked genuinely shocked. "Vincent, that's impossible. Who would—" "That's what I'm going to find out," Vincent said. He gestured to the hallway. 2 of his most loyal soldiers entered, dragging a bound and gagged, but conscious. Jared Blake. They threw him onto the expensive rug. Jared's eyes were wide with terror, his leg roughly bandaged. "This is the animal who put his hands on Alina," Vincent said, his voice dangerously soft. "The tool who was sent to kill me. He failed." He then looked at his lieutenants. "The rival family that hired him, the Rinaldis. They failed, but the mole is still here." He leaned forward, his gaze locking on his cousin. "Jared was captured last night, but before he was, he made one last call to his handler, a call my men were tracing." He nodded to Sal. "You run the books." "Sal, what did you find?" Sal swallowed, opening a ledger. "Irregular payments, boss. Small amounts funneled to an offshore account, but the account links back." "To you, Rico," Vincent said, his voice flat. Rico's face went white. "Me? Vincent, this is a lie. He's lying. You can't—" "The call," Vincent said, "was to a burner phone, the same burner phone my men found in your car this morning, the one you used to coordinate with the Rinaldis, the ones who really helped you, not the Rinaldis. It was a trap, a lie built on a single truth." Vincent didn't know which rival family it was. He just knew it was Rico. Rico broke. His composure, his charm, it all dissolved. "He was weak," he spat, his face twisted in a snarl. "Leo was weak. He made us vulnerable. He trusted everyone, and you were just muscle." You were never meant to lead. You were too stupid to see it, too stubborn to die. The family needed a real boss. The Rinaldis agreed. They helped me with Leo, and they helped me set you up. Jared was just a stupid, disposable tool to get you in the ground. The confession hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Marco and Sal looked at Rico with pure, cold disgust. Betraying the family was one thing. Admitting to a hand in Leo's death was unforgivable. Vincent did not move. He simply stared at his cousin, the man who shared his blood, the man who had ordered his brother's death. "Get him out of my sight," Vincent whispered. His soldiers grabbed Rico, who was now sobbing, begging. "Vince, please. He was a bad leader. It was for the family. Blood, blood." "You are not my blood," Vincent said, turning his back. He heard the apartment door open and close. He heard the muffled sound of a struggle in the hallway, and then a single, final, muffled shot. Silence. He looked down at Jared, who was trembling on the floor. "And now, you..." The final ambush was set for midnight. Vincent had used Rico's phone to send a message to Jared's remaining crew, who were scattered and terrified. The message was simple. "The boss is dead. The girl is mine. Bring the cash you owe me and meet at the Southside warehouse. Come alone." But the real trap was for Jared himself. Vincent needed to end this. All of it in one clean sweep. He had another loyal man call Jared's crew, posing as a Rinaldi associate, and offer them a new deal. Bring Jared Blake to the warehouse, and they would be rewarded for their loyalty. Jared was the lure, the bait, and the sacrifice. All in one. "You're not coming," Vincent said to Alina. He was standing by the door, his sling gone, his arm strapped tightly to his chest. He was pale, but upright. "I am," Alina said. She was dressed in dark jeans and a black sweater. She was not the shaking woman from the cabin. She was not the panicked victim from the warehouse. She was stone. "Alina, this is not a rescue. This is an execution. This is my world. Stay here, where you are safe." "I have not been safe one day of my life, Vincent," she said, her voice quiet but unbending. "Not until I met you. And then I was safe in a cabin while men hunted me. I was safe in a high-rise while you tore your family apart. I am done being safe. I am done being caged." She walked up to him, her eyes locking on his. "He is my monster. Vincent, I will not hide in a room while you slay him for me. I will be there. I will see it end. And then I will be free." He stared at her, seeing the unshakable steel in her spine. He saw the woman he had trained, the woman who had held a gun on her abuser. He saw a queen, not a pawn. He nodded. A single, grim motion. "Stay behind me. Do not move unless I tell you. And when it starts, do not look away." The warehouse was a cavern of concrete and shadows. It smelled of rust and cold river water. Vincent's men, perhaps a dozen of them, were hidden in the rafters, on the catwalks, ghosts in the gloom. Vincent and Alina stood in the center, in a single pool of light from an overhead bulb. They were the bait. They heard the scrape of the large metal door. 3 of Jared's men walked in, their hands raised nervously. They were pushing Jared in front of them, his hands bound, his leg dragging. "We got him," one of the men called out, his voice echoing. "Like the Rinaldis said. We get our money, right? We're done with this." Jared looked up, his eyes wide, first with confusion, then with a dawning, sickening horror. He saw Vincent looking like a dark king, his arm bound, and he saw Alina, standing beside him, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. "Alina," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Baby, what did he do to you? You're with him?" "She was never with you, Jared," Vincent said, his voice amplified in the huge, empty space. "You bitch," Jared screamed, his terror turning to his old, familiar rage. "You stupid, worthless—" "It's over," Alina said, her voice cutting through his, clear and cold. "You have nothing. Your men are gone. Your protection is gone. You—" Jared was vibrating with fury. He saw the trap. He saw her, whole and strong. He saw the man he could not beat, and he snapped, with a desperate, animal roar. He broke free of his men, who were too stunned to react. He lunged, not at Vincent, but at Alina. He was faster than Vincent. In his wounded state, could anticipate. He grabbed her, his arm locking around her throat, pulling her back, using her as a shield. "You want her? You want her. You'll watch me kill her," he screamed, his face purple. Alina clawed at his arm, but his grip was iron. "Let her go, Jared," Vincent said, his voice lethally calm. He had not drawn his weapon. "You'll shoot me? You'll shoot through her? You don't have the guts," Jared crowed, shuffling backward, pulling her into the shadows. "No," Vincent said. A single, deafening crack echoed through the warehouse. It came not from Vincent, but from above. Jared screamed, a high, thin sound. His grip on Alina vanished as he collapsed, clutching his leg, his good leg. A dark stain spread across his thigh. Vincent's sniper, Alina scrambled away, falling to the concrete, gasping. Jared was on the ground. His gun, which his men had given back to him, had skittered from his waistband. It lay on the concrete, halfway between them. Jared saw it. He lunged for it. Alina, acting on pure instinct, lunged for it too. Her hand closed around the grip first. She snapped it up, her arms locking, just as Vincent had taught her. She was on her knees, aiming at the man who had haunted her every dream for 3 years. He froze. He was 10 feet away, bleeding, broken, his eyes wide with a new, genuine fear. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Alina's hands were shaking. Her entire body trembled. This was it, the moment she could end it. She could pull the trigger and erase him from the world. She could take back every beating, every whispered threat, every second of her stolen life. She saw the pathetic, terrified animal on the floor. She saw the blood, and she saw herself, holding the weapon, ready to become the one thing she hated. She lowered the gun. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not you." Jared saw his chance, her hesitation, her mercy. He saw it as weakness. With a final, hate-filled snarl, he lunged again, his hands outstretched, aiming for her throat. "You bitch!" A second shot, louder, closer. Jared's body was thrown backward, a dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. He hit the ground and did not move. Alina looked up. Vincent was standing over her, his own gun smoking in his good hand. He had protected her, not just from Jared, but from the last, final act of becoming him. Silence descended. Then the sound of sirens, distant but closing. Vincent's men emerged from the shadows, moving with calm efficiency. "The police are on their way," Marco said, his voice respectful. "An anonymous tip about a gang shootout? By the time they get here, this place will be clean. We'll handle the bodies." He looked at the 3 cowering men who had brought Jared, and the trash. He then bowed his head slightly. "The Rinaldis have been informed of their part in Rico's betrayal. They've offered apologies and tribute. The family is secure. Boss, your control is absolute." Vincent nodded. He holstered his weapon and reached down, offering his good hand to Alina. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. She did not look back at the body. She just walked with him, out of the warehouse, out of the shadows, and into the flashing blue and red lights of their old life. They were back at the high-rise apartment. The sun was coming up, painting the city in hues of gray and pale yellow. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep, hollow exhaustion. Alina was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the waking city. Vincent stood behind her, his shoulder aching, his soul heavier. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" she said, her voice quiet. She turned to face him. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair a tangled mess, but her eyes were clear. "I'm not running anymore. Vincent, I'm not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of anyone." She took a step toward him. "But I'm afraid of this. I saw you tonight. I saw your men. The coldness, the efficiency, the blood." She looked at his hands, the ones she had washed, the ones that had just taken a life. "I can't live in that world. I can't be the woman who waits in the high-rise while you go to war. I don't want to be, and I don't want you to be that man anymore." He flinched, as if she had struck him. "Alina, this is my life. It's all I've ever known. It was my father's. It was my brother's. It's a prison," she finished for him. "You told me that. You never wanted this life. You're the boss now. You've won. You have absolute control." She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. "Isn't that the one thing a boss has? The power to walk away?" He hesitated. He looked past her. At the empire he had just reclaimed, the kingdom of dirt he now commanded. He could have anything: power, money, fear. But it was all hollow. It was all blood. Then he looked at her strength, at her mercy, at the woman who had faced her monster and chosen not to become one. The woman who saw him not as a boss, not as a killer, but as a man. He covered her hand with his. "This," he said, his voice thick, "this was never my choice, but you are." He took a deep breath, the decision settling in his bones, heavy and light all at once. "I'll walk away," he promised. "I'll burn it all down. I'll give it to Marco. I'll disappear." He met her eyes, his own full of a raw, desperate hope. "If you'll walk forward with me." She didn't have to answer. She just rose up on her toes and kissed him. A kiss that tasted not of gunpowder and death, but of a new, clean, and open morning. The cabin was not a cabin. It was a house, built of strong cedar and glass, high on a different mountain, one in the Pacific Northwest. The wilderness was still there, the tall pines, the sharp, clean air. But it was not a place to hide. The windows were vast, and the sky was open. A man was chopping wood. He swung the axe with a powerful, practiced rhythm. He wore a flannel shirt, and his left arm, though scarred, was strong. He set a log on the block and split it clean. The sliding glass door opened. "Vincent," a voice called. He turned. Alina was standing on the deck, holding 2 steaming mugs. She was wearing a thick sweater, her hair longer, her face relaxed and full of a quiet, steady happiness. He smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He set the axe down and walked to her, taking the mug. "It's getting cold," she said, leaning against him. "The fire is warm," he replied, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her close. They stood together on the deck, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks. There were no more shadows, no more running, no more looking over their shoulders. It was just the mountain, the quiet, and the two of them finally rebuilding a life in the open. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more, and we'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts on this tale in English.